Good evening. My name is Hugh Page. I serve as a member of the SBL Council, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to this evening's conversation, the second in our two-part Black Scholars Matter Symposium. I am delighted to be part of this precedent-setting event that brings together Black scholars from various locales and at various career stages to talk about their visions, their struggles, their lessons learned, and their hopes for the future. Before we begin, let me express my gratitude to those responsible for organizing this event, Drs. Benny Liu, Kimberly Russaw, and Raj Nadella, as well as SBL President Adele Reinhartz, Efrain Agosto, Chair of the SBL Council, the members of the SBL Council, and John Kutzko, Executive Director of the Society, and his team for their support of these gatherings. We are also particularly grateful for the work of Christopher Hooker, SBL's Director of Membership and Programs, for his behind-the-scenes work in managing logistics for this evening's panel. The construction of disciplinary domains in the West and the contextualization of that process within a larger set of social, political, and historical dynamics is an issue to which many in the academy today are becoming increasingly more attentive. Within the realm of biblical studies in the Americas, our awareness of the ways that race is factored into the various endeavors central or ancillary to scholarship, as well as in the recruitment, training, and nurture of Africana scholars, has become keener than ever before. There is much to be done to ensure that the ideas, the work, the lives, and the livelihoods of Black Bible scholars are valued within our professional society and in the larger world. The conversations of yesterday and this evening are crucial in advancing that cause, and I am delighted that all joining us this evening have an interest in participating in this important endeavor as allies. Our distinguished panel of speakers this evening has been invited to reflect on the larger theme of Black Scholars Matter, Lessons and Hopes, and to approach this topic from their vantage points. They are Dr. Ronald Charles, Dr. Stephanie Buchanan Crowder, Dr. Steve Vernil Davidson, Dr. Vanessa Lovelace, Dr. Kimberly Russaw, and Dr. Abraham Smith. Each will offer 10 minutes of comments, after which they will have an opportunity to respond to one another's reflections. We will give them a signal when they have 2 minutes remaining. In the time allotted now, we'll have an opportunity for questions to be posed to our panelists. The portion of our session will be facilitated by Dr. Sidney White Crawford, my colleague and fellow SBL Council member. But before we begin, I call your attention to a couple of technical matters. We are utilizing this evening the Zoom webinar platform. Therefore, the chat function is not enabled. Attendees can, however, send questions to the panelists using the Q&A feature. You can access it using the Q&A button on your screen. After clicking or tapping the Q&A button, feel free to type your question and it will be sent to our chat moderator. We welcome your questions, and there will be time reserved at the end of this evening's seminar specifically for those to be posed to attendees. However, please note that due to the large number of those attending this session, it is likely that we will not be able to address every query posed. A video of this session will be available to anyone wishing to view it on the symposium webpage after our time together draws to a close. Captions will be included on the video when it is posted to the SBL website. Now, it is my honor to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Ronald Charles. Dr. Charles is Assistant Professor in Religious Studies at St. Francis Xavier University, Nova Scotia, Canada. He is the author of 3 books, Paul and the Politics of Diaspora, Traductions bibliques, Créole et préjugés linguistiques, and The Silencing of Slaves in Early Jewish and Christian Writings. Dr. Charles, welcome.
Thank you very much. I like to begin by thinking about social location. I am from the Caribbean. I am from Haiti. This is where I grew up. This is where I studied linguistics and theology as an undergraduate student. This is where I learned how to play the violin, classical violin, with a professor who had a master's in violin performance from Juilliard. This is where I grew up. This is the place that formed me. And then I went to study in Toronto for 2 masters and then my PhD from the University of Toronto. I have taught at the University of Miami in Florida, and I have been here teaching where I am for 6 years. First, as a limited term assistant professor, and now as a tenure track assistant professor. I begin this way to talk about social location, to talk about journey, but also to talk about a sense that I've always felt, a sense of not totally belonging, a sense of being dislocated, a sense of being an outsider, a sense of even loneliness. Who does that? Who studies classical violin in Haiti? Who does that? Who is from Haiti and who is interested in pseudepigraphic literature and texts outside of the Christian canon? Not many. In fact, at the SBL, we are not many Haitians. We are probably 5 members who are of Haitian descent. So the first lesson that I have learned is that I have learned to accept who I am. I have learned to accept my own dislocation. I have learned to accept my own loneliness. But I also have learned to do what is of interest to me, to continue to be myself, and to accept my own marginality. Let me quote Edward Said in his Representations of the Intellectual, page 62. I quote, he says, exile means that you are always going to be marginal, and that what you do as an intellectual has to be made up because you cannot follow a prescribed path. I am who I am. I accept exile, dislocation, and I'm fine with that. The second lesson that I have learned to read broadly. I have learned to read in the way that Edward Said again puts it, contrapuntally. That is, I read voraciously and I read text from different sides. I always feel that I cannot only restrict myself to be simply a scholar of religions in the ancient Mediterranean worlds. I was trained in New Testament, first in seminary, then in a religious studies environment at the University of Toronto. The rigorous training I had in biblical studies, ancient history, and the patient learning of how to read texts, ancient texts, very closely, all of these have been extremely valuable in my own scholarly work. However, as one from the Caribbean, as one from Haiti, I always had to read a variety of critical texts, history, politics, linguistics, philosophy, in order to help me understand my own social location and the politics that have affected me and others like me. I became an interdisciplinary scholar because of who I am. So Caribbean scholars have been very influential in my own thinking. Some Haitian scholars, for example, Rolf Trouillot, who wrote the famous book, Silencing the Past, or C.L.R. James, or Frantz Fanon, or Césaire, or Glissant, all these authors have been extremely important to me, and I have learned to read broadly, voraciously, through disciplines. Thirdly, I learned that the nagging feeling that I have, that I always have, the feeling of being out of place, this is what is called the imposter syndrome, that I'm not good enough, that I'm presumed to be incompetent by others, by many others. This feeling that I don't belong is one that I continue to have. And maybe that may never go away, even after publishing 3 books in the span of about 5 years. This feeling of not belonging, this feeling of not good enough, probably will never go away, but I also use this feeling I work with that feeling that pushes me to do more, that pushes me to do better, that pushes me not to be accepted by others, but to strive for excellence. Fourthly, I learned to say yes. I learned to say yes to opportunities. I learned to say yes to projects. I learned to say yes to invitations. I learned to say yes to do book reviews, to teach, even if it was just say a 9-month contract at the beginning. I learned to say yes to opportunities. And I feel that it is a privilege to really have these opportunities. And I felt that I needed to say yes. Now I am overwhelmed by works that I have to do because I have said yes to so many invitations. But probably I need to also learn to say no. But how do I say no to a student who looks at me and considers me to be a role model, to be a voice for change? How do I say no to talk on a session on anti-Black racism at orientation for new faculty? How can I say no to serve on a racial justice leadership grant education committee? How can I say no to be a part of a committee on status of women and equity? How can I say no to serve as campus representative on a committee of First Nations and Black student success? How can I say no? How do you say no to struggle and to join in the struggles of others while you try to be an active researcher? I don't know. Hopes for the future. My first hope is that I hope that I would see more people like me in position to shape the field. I remember my first SBL. It was in 2007. I was still a graduate student. That year, I barely had enough fund to go. I basically slept on a hotel room floor that 2 former professors of mine occupied. That year, I felt totally lost. It was when I went to a session organized by FTE, Fund for Theological Education, that I felt part of a group that seemed to get exactly what I was going through: the loneliness, the bewilderment, the lack of funding to move on in my studies further. I really hope to see more people like me in positions to shape the field. Second, I hope to see more people like me supervising graduate students in research universities. I work in a religious studies context. I am one of 2 Black professors working in a public institution and being in a religious studies department in Canada. I am the only Black scholar teaching biblical studies in a public university in Canada. I was hoping that the situation might probably have been or is different in the US, but I'm learning that there are very few scholars, especially in New Testament studies, teaching at research institutions in the US. So far, I have gathered 3 names: Richard Newton, University of Alabama; Demetrius Williams, University of Milwaukee; Musa Dube, who is starting at Emory next year. I'm talking about Black New Testament scholars teaching at research university. I would be happy to learn that there are, in fact, more. So think with me. In the whole North American context, there might only be 4 of us teaching New Testament in a public research-oriented university. To me, this is stunning. And the question to ask is, why? Why? Thirdly, I hope New Testament scholars would read a little bit more, not only about ancient history, but also about modern theories. The field is so under-theorized. In graduate school, I was the more eager to learn a lot from my seminar of method and theory in the study of religion, and to take a year of directed study in sociology, coupled with a very important class on diaspora studies. These forays in various areas of inquiry enabled me to be the type of scholar I am. So I wish that more scholars, especially in the New Testament, would actually take the time to read and to understand theories. So postcolonial studies, subaltern studies, these have been extremely useful to me. Fourthly and lastly, I hope New Testament scholars would take some more time to read poetry, read great novels, read and listen to voices from the margins. I would like to conclude with these words from Sugir Tharaja in the revised and expanded third edition of Voices from the Margin. This is what he says, page 9. The question is, do we want to replicate the colonial game of occupation and capture the center in the name of the oppressed? Or do we want to demolish the center itself and redraw its perimeters? The next set of questions will be, how many centers should we have? Who will provide the perimeters? And whose resources will we draw upon to redesign them? These questions should keep biblical interpreters busy for a seeable future. I wish that it's not only minoritized scholars who would read broadly about what other minoritized scholars are doing, but other scholars would also take the time to read what we do. And also, to be candid and a little bit provocative, why should we, that is, minoritized scholars, be the ones to be educating white scholars about struggles that we're going through? Why can't other scholars take also the time to read broadly and to learn a thing or two from what minoritized scholars are saying? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charles. It is an honor now to introduce our second presenter, Dr. Stephanie Buckhannon Crowder. Author, speaker, and teacher, Dr. Crowder is a Baptist and Disciples of Christ minister who holds a PhD in New Testament from Vanderbilt University. Her latest book is When Mama Speaks, the Bible and Motherhood from a Womanist Perspective. This hashtag Womanist Mama currently serves as Associate Professor and Academic Dean at Chicago Theological Seminary. Dr. Crowder, Welcome.
Good evening. I too want to cross my official T's and say thank you to SBL, to Drs. Russell, Lou, and Adela, and acknowledge yesterday's panelists and my colleagues on this virtual dais, and how grateful I am for this opportunity. As a student at Howard University, the first African-American biblical scholar I encountered was the late Dr. Kane Hope Felder. It was not in the academy, but he was preaching at Metropolitan Baptist Church on a Sunday morning. His identity as a scholar preacher intrigued me, and I became curious about African-American women New Testament scholars. And all roads led to Dr. Clarice J. Martin. As questions more than answers shift the room, alter a course, change dynamics, I begin with a question Dr. Martin posits in her essay entitled Womanist Interpretations of the New Testament, The Quest for Holistic and Inclusive Translation and Interpretation. Martin queries, what concerns do womanist biblical interpreters bring to the translation and interpretation of the Bible? As Martin astutely answers this question in her 1990 essay, the question remains just as contextually relevant 30 years later. And allow me to recontextualize this and other inquiries using the tag questions with no COVID-19 answers. Our profession pivots on questions. Inquiry drives research, questions conscript us. Yet the answers deem us scholarly worthy, essays, articles, that uniquely resolve the inquiry, lead to perhaps monographs, and yes, volumes answering the question. They get us on the lecture circuit. It's the scholarship that nuances the answers, and this makes Luce, Lilly, Louisville Institute call us. And yet I relish in questions. For example, who would have imagined our trying to expound on biblical context in a coronavirus context? Did you dare surmise teaching exegesis, reading out, leading out of the Bible while trying to see your way through this COVID-19 conundrum? When did the hallowed halls of academia instruct us on the tools of interpretation in the midst of stentorian social and physical isolation? Where was the model for getting students to focus on methodologies while wearing a mask? Why is it no one told us that someday our lectures on soteriology, sanctification, sense and Laban would be filtered through sanitizer, bleach, Pine Sol, and Lysol? How are we supposed to stay calm, stay the course, stay connected, do our biblical scholar due diligence when every day is WTH, when there's always a WTF moment? Where was the pedagogical path, the educational model for this watershed moment? What concerns do womanists, and I would add all Black biblical interpreters, bring to the translation and interpretation of the Bible in a context, I would add, where Black people are 3 times more likely to contract the coronavirus, 6 times more likely to be hospitalized as a result, and twice as likely to die of COVID-19. As our theme is lessons and hope, here's one lesson. Without minimizing the context, there are moments that conscript us to magnify the question and let the question carry the day. Our profession pivots on questions, but we cut our scholarly teeth on providing the answers. We know how to deliver content within context. We are indeed skilled at recreating settings. Our acumen, yes, is exhibited through decontextualization. Thus, although the past 5 months have posed dissonance, dis-ease, and discomfort, our discipline as biblical scholars gives us the tools to recontextualize this time. Ours is the call to build biblical study houses in a milieu that mandates sheltering in place. Ours is the vocation to build biblical studies houses when places of shelter are unsteady and insecure at best. Our ancestral summoning is to build biblical study houses in an environment where, according to that great theo-sociologist Luther Vandross, a house is not a home. How do we take skills mastered to unravel sacred text and employ them for meaning's sake today? Well, that's what methods do. Methodologies, it's the path to meaning, a road to understanding, a guide for getting to clarity. And for me, this path, this road, this guide is womanist maternal thought. This is the gaze from which I, as a mother, wrestle with racism, sexism, and classism, and many isms and phobias. Yeah, the oppressions that were the pandemic before this pandemic. And so why mention womanist maternal thought? You ask such good questions. A year ago this month, literary icon Toni Morrison went to be with the ancestors. Hear her words on love and motherhood. What my grandmother thought was love of her children was really staying alive for them. What my mother thought was love of children was getting a better place and maybe enough money to send them to college. What I thought of love for my children, says Morrison, was giving them the maximum amount of freedom, setting an example on how you could make choices in your life. Why womanist maternal thought? Because as a biblical scholar, author, minister, and more importantly, mother of 2 sons, I've been asking how and what and when and saying not again. These past 5 months, I've been wondering what my dearly departed grandmother would do to traverse this COVID-19 world. Why womanist maternal thought? Because I've been asking my mother, who took her own life, what would you have done in the midst of all of this? Live the questions now. I've been leaning on womanist maternal thought because from context of birthing centers to childcare to daycare to the corridors of universities, this COVID-19 pandemic has left nothing unsullied. Homes are now community centers, recreation centers, cafeterias, playgrounds, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth period. Parents are teachers. Big Mama is the tutor. Nana is the IT tech. Madeir is the principal, and Pawpaw is the guidance counselor. A womanist maternal lens in these coronavirus times means community mothers, other mothers, auntie, sister mom, uncle mama, church mothers, and all maternal figures in whatever gender manifestation and identification, biological or not, are needed. This is an all maternal hands on deck corona crisis. As a biblical scholar who ascribes to womanist maternal thought, I have asked, what would my grandmother, my mother, do in this C-19 state of emergency? Why? Because on May 25th of this year, a fake $20 bill cost George Floyd his life. In the 8 minutes and 40 seconds where he begged for his life, and before a knee crushed oxygen out of him, George Floyd called for his mama. As we consider lessons and hopes, how are we supposed to stay calm, stay the course, stay connected, do our biblical scholar due diligence when every day is WTH and WTF? Where was the pedagogical path, the model for this moment? My answer is to lean on the womanist maternal shield. My mother, my grandmother. We've been asked to ponder, where do you see biblical studies going? What are your hopes for biblical studies? And I return to my grandmother. As a child, I heard her say, after an encounter with a dear friend of hers, she said, I really appreciate Miss Peterson. She really came through for me. She hoped me. And I responded, what do you mean she hoped you? My grandmother laughed. She says, when I say she hoped me, that means she helped me. And what may have been to me a homonymic error or mistaken semantics, for my grandmother was an existential reality and proleptic positioning. For to help her was a way of giving hope. The help received gave her hope for a better tomorrow. Her hope grew deeper because the source and the community of her help grew wider. Romans 8:24-25 says, "For in this hope we are saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently." As Black biblical scholars, our job is, yes, to deal in hope of what could be. But why should we hope for what we already have? To return to Martin, what concerns do womanist biblical interpreters, and I would add, do Black biblical scholars in general, bring to translation and interpretation of the Bible in this coronavirus context? Our profession pivots on inquiry. Interrogatives drive research. We wrestle with the question, even and especially when there are no COVID-19 answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Crowder. It is now an honor to introduce our third speaker, Dr. Steed Vernil Davidson. Dr. Davidson is Professor of Hebrew Bible and the Dean of the Faculty at McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago, Illinois. His work focuses on post-colonial studies and biblical literature that offers reflections of race, gender, and empire. Dr. Davidson, welcome.
Thank you. A sincere word of appreciation is due to the organizers of this event. You have offered me an exciting opportunity in a year when excitement is all too uncommon. This event helps to fill out the deep gap created by a virtual annual meeting and the absence of the opportunity to take advantage of what the SBL and its annual meeting has meant for me. The place for networking with the scholarly community that I have created over the years. Make no doubt about it, I look forward to the annual meeting, even as I recognize how much of an intensely white space the SBL is. But however, with enough social capital, curiosity, collaborative work, and charm, the annual meeting has become a host to a set of shared parasitic tendencies necessary for the intellectual and scholarly survival of those in my community. I have found myself in some organic places at the SBL that I may or may not have formed, may or may not have been invited into. But as things happen, these fluid groups, if they should be called groups, gather around the rejection of the presuppositions that form the SBL as an arm of the university, and by extension, the knowledge power component needed to sustain the colonialist structures of Western modernity. Over the years, we have had various versions of these current conversations, raised our voices in strategic places in the Guild, as well as created alternative spaces to pursue the sort of work that could sustain our lives. And by lives here, I do not mean the institutionalized lives as Sarah Ahmed calls it. The lives we live to keep our place in the university. I mean life. And I mean work, not careers, work that fills life out. In these reflections, therefore, I try to carve out a space described as revolutionary and fugitive, informed in part by the work of Stefano Harney and Fred Moten in their book, The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. The legacies of my Caribbean identity as placed within the contours of the Haitian Revolution, Maroons in Jamaica and St. Vincent, or the numerous rebellions and acts of sedition staged by enslaved Africans in the archipelago also inform this revolutionary and fugitive posture. Now, I invoke these formations here, and there are many others that I haven't mentioned, because I have become all too aware that securing and sustaining a place within the academy means constantly responding to the academic interpolation of Black scholarly life. Edgy enough to be seen as cool, rigorous enough to be taken seriously, Afrocentric to the extent that it does not displace Eurocentric ways of being and ways of knowing. In other words, don't protest, don't oppose, don't be revolutionary. Be content with having a place on the inside. Growing up with racism without racists made it possible for me to respond to the siren calls of the academy. But the slow recognition that I could not attune my voice to the academic accents or twist my writing to the acceptable styles without a great deal of agonizing effort has made me more despondent, but more defiant. When I wrote my dissertation, I included a quotation from the African biblical scholar Musa Dube, where she describes the legacies of the Bible in Africa and the experiences that Africans have engaging the Bible. Dube writes this in 1997, and I quoted her in 2005, where she describes the experience as, quote, dangerous memories of slavery, colonialism, apartheid, and neocolonialism. To read the Bible as an African is to relive the painful equation of Christianity with civilization, paganism, and slavery. The quotation struck me for several reasons. For one, I thought it was a harsh assessment. Secondly, I thought this might have been the terrible African reality. This doesn't apply to my experience in the Caribbean. But despite my easy dismissal of her view at that time, and of course inclusion of the quotation in my work, 15 years later, that insight remains with me to the point that I can embrace it as my experience. Because settler Christianity has convinced me that I had a copy of the sweet loving Jesus' Bible. But instead, the Bible that I have and have been working with is more the product of the cultural, political, and religious movements that result in the European empires that shape our modern world. I am writing a book on post-colonial biblical criticism with my good friend Raj Ndela. And writing this book, living within the excesses of neoliberalism and within the days of a global pandemic within the United States, I become painfully aware how racialized capitalism has shaped a world with the complicity of biblical texts. When I wrote my dissertation in the midst of the Iraq invasion and the resulting counterinsurgency, I was living out in real time ancient imperial aggressions and imperialist logics that I was reading in the Bible that were also emerging from the country where I was living. These are deeply searing experiences that by academic rigorous standards should be editorialized out of my writing. And should I include them, the resultant work will be assessed as less than scholarly, maybe too emotional. Systems like the academy and all of its attendant arms can be easily reformed because it is the work of constant reformation that all of us do that keeps them and sustains them in their missions. Left to their initial structuring, to their initial setup, they would have collapsed. They continue because we keep reforming them. Admittedly, I have to name my own complicity in this work of reformation and the perpetuation of the systems, And those of you who get emails from me will see them. Professor of Hebrew Bible, academic dean, general editor of an SBL book series. 3 positions that locate me at strategic and important places, comfortable titles, prestigious, if that was the aim of my life. Instead, of course, I aim for the revolutionary place, where I can use these positions to undo the systems. So why? Why take on that posture when there is comfort waiting in the great titles? Why embrace a revolutionary and fugitive existence? The fuller life I want for myself and for others, beset by the colonialist project, is that revolutionary life. Primarily because we can convince ourselves that there is something comfortable waiting for us as people of color or Black people or formerly enslaved individuals. But it is not. The life of protest, escape, and destructions of systems that never were designed for us or a full thriving, well, may just be the way of life to which we are called. But I'm not yet sufficiently courageous. So I take small steps with the hope to join the work of others in dismantling the minions of racial capitalism with agents such as settler Christianity and the university. I embrace acts of sedition, slow writing, and rejection of a value system that wishes to evaluate me based upon my productivity and production of writing for an increasingly narrow and limited audience of scholarly biblical work. My form of the revolution consists sometimes of sleeping at nights in order to preserve my body, rather than surrender my actual physical body to the tiresome demands of the celebrity adjacent status I could achieve if only I performed the mimesis that at best gets me to the point of what Homi Bhabha describes as almost the same, but not quite, or not quite, not quite. I advocate for the type of scholarly writing that enables the use of what Edward Kamau Brafitt regards as nation language. Language that disrupts the assumptions of what he calls the language of the conquistador, the language of the planter, the language of the official, the language of the Anglican preacher. I do so knowing that the issue is more than simply the words we use or the style of the writing, but the interruption of systems that have forced people to learn and reproduce things that have no relevance to their lives. This opportunity that we are embraced in with these conversations can be a moment where we tinker around the edges to pursue the path of diversity and inclusion within a system designed to exact value from Black bodies. Managing diversity has always been an imperial occupation. This opportunity can be one where we rethink the systems of scholarly engagement and knowledge production around the Bible. In doing so, we may come to terms with the fact that our work is about deconstructing the great English book. The book and its related book culture that emerged out of the colonialist Western modernity. The ancient text, in many ways, is lost to us. In this work, we value ways of knowing, various towns, and importantly, invest in life-giving work. And this is not always the same presuppositions of the book or the ways in which the Guild has worked. Now, my reflections here may seem short on specifics and long on zeal and enthusiasm to burn something. Including an affective touch in my reflections serves to help me make my point of how academic life requires us to sunder aspects of ourselves. That Black lives are already seen as not quite. To bring our Black selves into academic spaces with the colonialist assumptions of the university means we enter as less than whole beings. Now, the SBL if it is to truly value Black life in all of its fullness, needs to attend to the structures that implicitly and explicitly truncate the Black scholar at the point of formation, with a misshapen existence as the best possible future scholarly existence. At its best, the Black scholarly life exists within the nuances and in the depths of the community, attentive to the searing questions and felt needs of people whose lives continue to be distorted by a colonialist system that thinks that it is good and doing good in the world. And for us as biblical scholars, it means interrogating the ways within which the great book has been promoted as a source of good, and the ways in which it may have distorted, misshapen, truncated, oppressed the lives of many persons. Black scholarly life interprets, translates, and communicates the murmurs and groans and the celebrations of Black people, Indigenous people, queer folk, disabled folk, and so on and so on. That motley crew who live within the underside of our society, whose aspirations are sometimes made of no account. And then so the challenge for us is, how do we use the spaces that we have to bring to bear work that gives life to us and really gives life to others. So that's the life that I'm willing to invest in. That's the revolution that I hope to see happen and will be willing to join. And when it certainly happens or doesn't happen, I'm ready to head to the hills to build a new space where those of us who are committed to life can thrive and do the kind of intellectual work that can build out the hopes of people for a new and better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Davidson. It is an honor now to introduce our fourth presenter, the Reverend Dr. Vanessa Lovelace. Dr. Lovelace is Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean at Lancaster Theological Seminary. She is the co-editor with Gay L. Byron of Womanist Interpretations of the Bible, Expanding the Discourse, and co-chair of the Women in the Biblical World unit of SBL. Dr. Lovelace, welcome.
Thank you. Like my colleagues before me, I would also like to thank those organizers, especially Vinnie Liu and Kimberly Russell, Raj Nadella, for organizing this, as well as Christopher Hooker, who has been so diligent in making sure that everything was done in order. And so I want to focus on what I've learned. And what I've learned first is to give honor to whom honor is due. And so I begin by acknowledging those Black biblical scholars who preceded me in the academy and continue to be major influences on my scholarship today. Mentor and former colleague Randall C. Bailey, Renita J. Weems, Charles B. Kofer, Kane Hope Felder, Clarice J. Martin, and Vincent I. Wimbush. I learned from them that instead of waiting for someone to acknowledge your research as a scholar and finally publish your work, to invite Black and other scholars of color to publish your own edited volumes. Stony the Road We Trod, African American Biblical Interpretation, edited by Kane Hope Felder in 1991, remains a classic text used in introductory biblical studies in African American hermeneutics classes. There is also the Africana Bible, Reading Israel's Scriptures from Africa and the African Diaspora, edited by Hugh Page, Randall C. Bailey, Valerie Bridgman, Stacy Davis, Cheryl Kirk Dugan, Matapone Masenya, Samuel Morrell, and Rodney Sadler. African Americans in the Bible, Sacred Texts and Social Textures, edited by Vincent Wimbush. And they were all together in one place? Toward Minority Biblical Criticism, edited by Randall C. Bailey, Tatsong Binny Liu, and Fernando Segovia. Their example of collaborative work and cooperation was the model for womanist interpretations of the Bible, expanding the discourse, edited by Gail L. Byron and myself. I don't know if it's true for them, but I can say that womanist interpretations of the Bible grew out of conversations begun at an SBL annual meeting, specifically the annual meeting in San Francisco in 2011. I also learned from them the importance of citing Black and other minoritized scholars, especially Black and brown women scholars, in all my work. I have cited every one of these scholars at some point in my teaching and writing. If we do not promote and share one another's work, who else will? And not just in print, but also on social media. I love the hashtag #CiteBlackWomen. Every chance I get, I like, tweet, or retweet the publications of Black and other minoritized scholars. This is how we extend the important work that we are doing to a wider audience. I learned the importance of paying it forward. My teaching and research have advanced over the years because someone, and not just Black scholars, invited me to serve on a committee or to contribute to a writing project, passed along my name to write a book review or article or chapter, wrote a reference letter on my behalf to apply for a grant or work or job, read or edited a writing assignment or proposal, or just offered their support. A number of these encounters or opportunities occurred at SBL annual meetings. And I'd like to pause and acknowledge a few of those people. Nisha Jr., AJ Levine, Claudia Camp, Cheryl Kirk-Dugan, Gail Yee, Ida Pilarski, Julia O'Brien, Suzanne Schultz, and Ken Stone, among other biblical scholars, offered their support and opportunities early in my career. I have paid this forward by identifying and encouraging new and potential scholars to investigate and apply for the Forum for Theological Exploration Fellowships. I've submitted names of new faculty members to attend the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning in Theology and Religion new faculty dinner held annually at the SBL meeting. And I encourage students to attend the Society of Biblical Literature and American Academy of Religion annual or regional meetings. I invite doctoral students and junior scholars to serve on the SBL Women in the Biblical World Unit, which I co-chair, or as session moderators and panelists at annual meetings. I read papers, write reference letters, and offer whatever assistance that I can. One of the things I'm most proud of is the decision by Gay and I to include an independent scholar, junior scholars, and a PhD candidate to contribute to womanist interpretations of the Bible. This is not about me, but of the importance of the obligation to pass along what I was given. I am encouraged by the young scholars of color that are celebrated each year at the FTE reception at the annual meeting. Those rising scholars that I have been privileged to collaborate with: Erica Dunbar, M. Tong, Justin Reed, Phoebe Dickerson, and those doctoral students who are in the pipeline. As hopeful as I am by their potential, I am yet dismayed that still in 2020, US-born Black women with terminal degrees in biblical studies still number just under 40. 2 are deceased, and at least 5 are no longer working in the academy, at a seminary, divinity school, or religion or philosophy department at a college or university. Given the current purging of faculty at institutions of higher education in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, I wonder whether there will be a job for those doctoral students and graduates on the job market. Black scholars matter. The loss of these brilliant Black and other scholars of color in the academy will be woefully felt for a generation, a damage to our intellectual enterprise that has not been felt since the attacks on Black educational achievement recounted by Carol Anderson in White Rage, the unspoken truth of our racial divide over the dismantling of Brown v. Board of Education by white supremacists. #CiteBlackWomen. Some may say, given the isolation and discrimination against Black scholars, that they are better off without the Academy. That may be true, but the Academy would not be better off without Black scholars. Black scholars matter. I bring my embodied Black woman and womanist scholarship to my classroom, and my students and colleagues are the beneficiaries. My teaching and research matter. I am nonetheless grateful that I have been privileged to enjoy the vocation of academic ministry that has allowed me to learn along with students on this theological educational journey as I hone my teaching and research skills in the classroom. I have unapologetically written as a womanist scholar on the intersection of the Hebrew Bible, race, gender, sexuality, and class, and have taken every opportunity given to share biblical scholarship from the context of Black women and other women of color's experience. Black women and Black scholars matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lovelace. It is now an honor to introduce our fifth presenter, Dr. Kimberly D. Russaw. Dr. Russaw is Assistant Professor of Hebrew Bible at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. She is the author of Daughters in the Hebrew Bible, published in 2018, and the forthcoming volume, Revisiting Rahab. Dr. Russaw, welcome.
Thank you so very much. In my faith tradition, I would say protocol has been established. And so I am thankful for the opportunity to join this august group of scholars. The title and purpose of this two-day symposium lends itself to considering not only what it means to be a Black scholar of the Bible, but what it means to support both Black biblical scholars and, more to my point, Black graduate students in the area of biblical studies. For the time that is mine, I invite us to focus our attention on targeted mentoring and instructional ethos as critical components of the larger enterprise of our guild, transforming our academic spaces so that these spaces become more welcoming and supportive of Black, brown, and beige bodies. I am particularly interested in the work of mentoring and helping to prepare emerging scholars of color in theological and religious studies education, especially Black biblical students. For the last several years, I have coordinated the doctoral mentoring efforts of the Forum for Theological Exploration, also known as FTE. FTE is a leadership incubator dedicated to cultivating diverse young adults to be faithful, wise, and courageous leaders for the church and the academy. Important for this evening's conversation is FTE's long-standing commitment to supporting doctoral students of color through graduate school and into vocations of teaching and scholarship in theological education and religious studies. FTE includes a mentoring component in its doctoral fellowship program. This mentoring component partners scholars in the FTE network, some who were FTE fellows themselves, with current FTE doctoral fellows. This mentor-mentee program is designed to journey with doctoral fellows as they matriculate their fellowship year, through scheduled check-ins and with the fellows and their academic advisors. This mentoring approach responds to research which demonstrates that when our fellows connect with mentors and receive support, they simply fare better in their programs. Recent FTE data reveals 3 challenges for students of color in theological education and religious studies programs from which our guild can learn. These challenges are: 1, ways of being in the academy; 2, isolation; and 3, communication with advisors. Know that for Black graduate students in biblical studies, These challenges are exacerbated by instructional ethos in general and the dynamics of language classrooms in particular. For Black doctoral students, an important part of the mentoring process involves helping students manage the challenges of being in the academy. Students learn early that they must have a quote unquote public face. Let me explain. During their doctoral program, fellows are challenged by their differences. FTE fellows work to maintain a public face as they struggle with problems communicating with their advisors and persons in authority, and suffer from isolation among their colleagues. Many fellows are challenged by social customs and norms of academic spaces and culture. This is particularly challenging for international students and first-generation graduate students of color born on American soil. For instance, academic methodologies in theological education may require a different worldview than many Black students may be comfortable with. Many of these students have been formed in and supported by conservative, faith-based communities, and much of the critical academic study of the Bible challenges their long-held beliefs. While the students embrace the challenge and even excel in their learning, this new intellectual formation makes it difficult for them to return home and reintegrate into the religious spaces that have nurtured them. Additionally, many of our students confide that they are uncomfortable initiating relationships with their colleagues, and vice versa. Many of their colleagues seemed uncomfortable and or appeared unwilling to initiate relationships with them. This suggests that the admission strategies of graduate programs must consider the makeup of non-Black students who will be part of our students' cohorts. Those responsible for sourcing students and faculty for graduate programs cannot overlook potential racist foundations that make it difficult for some students and faculty members to share space equitably and equally with students and faculty of color. Institutions must foster intellectual incubators that are intentional about including students and faculty that are comfortable engaging difference from both sides of the historical and cultural chasm. Black doctoral students who are navigating ways of being in the academy and unhealthy relational dynamics make the second concern, isolation, even more pronounced for students and scholars of color. As I am sure some of you with graduate students can attest, the self-isolation brought on by the coronavirus safety protocols exacerbated pre-existing feelings of isolation for some students of color in graduate programs. In order to mitigate isolation, FTE works to share community accountability best practices with fellows throughout their doctoral programs. FTE works to create spaces for collaboration and check-ins among students and mentoring cohorts. This leads me to the third challenge for students of color in theological and religious studies programs that FTE's mentoring data reveals: communication with advisors. Communication with program advisors is critical for our students. Many of our assigned mentors share that program advisors are busy and are looking for the fellow to initiate and follow up on routine meetings and check-in sessions. This is particularly difficult for students who are already by themselves statistically in these programs. In other words, they are the minority in their academic spaces. In addition to the advisor-student power dynamics at play, to expect a minoritized student new to the program and still establishing trusting relationships who is living in isolation with all of its attendant vulnerabilities to proactively drive the advising process is almost untenable. This approach discounts the historic systemic issues that renders these students, quote unquote, other in academic spaces in the first place. Furthermore, it imprints forms of microaggressive systems that even the most well-intentioned institutions seeking to expand their endeavors in diversity, equity, and inclusion often read over. Graduate departments need to think deeply and take decisive actions toward creating collegiate communities that support Black students at the levels of peer conversation partners and faculty advisory support. To be clear, in the discussion of Black Scholars Matter, mentoring matters, especially in the area of biblical studies. Furthermore, unique to students in biblical studies is the additional burden of acquiring proficiency in the ancient languages. While many capable emerging Black scholars shy away from the language requirements for Bible degrees for various reasons, we cannot discount the very real and unhealthy experiences of Black students, especially Black female students, in language classes. I can point to anecdotal data and testimonials of Black female students who have experienced a double-edged sword of sorts while seated around the table in Semitic and Greco-Roman language courses. Sword is the correct metaphor here because navigating language courses and competencies can be a matter of life and death for many of us in biblical studies. One edge of the sword that Black students encounter is the presumption of incompetence in language. This belief in our students' incompetence manifests in instructors not inviting them to participate fully in class exercises, perhaps because they do not want to slow down the rest of the class. And in some cases, instructors sending nonverbal signals that they have indeed discounted the student altogether. I've heard of Black women shutting themselves down because their instructors have not taken their questions seriously. The other edge of the sword Black students encounter is the presumption of hyper-competence. In these cases, instructors do not provide our students with the needed second look or ask cognition questions because they think these students do not need any help. For some Black women in particular, these classroom dynamics result in them seeking and paying for tutoring and teaching to provide the mentoring in the language translation and interpretation they are not receiving in the classroom. Importantly, this phenomenon of presumed incompetence or presumed hypercompetence extends beyond the language classroom for Black, brown, and beige bodies. And in the discussion of Black Scholars Matter, this matters. We must attend to the ways we are constructing academic spaces that build collegial communities and conversation partners for Black biblical studies students. Moreover, an important intervention that calls for more attention in the way we disrupt archaic patterns of teacher-student interactions built on Greco-Roman models of intellectual apprenticeship, which did not have to account for the historical inequities and exclusions exacted on our contemporary society's intersectional identities of, at minimum, race, class, and gender. This evening, I do not have all the answers, but I am convinced that a conversation around Black Scholars Matter must include doubling down on the commitment to attend to matters of mentoring and instructional ethos in our field. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Russell. It is now an honor to introduce our sixth and final presenter, Dr. Abraham Smith. an ordained National Baptist Church USA minister. Dr. Smith teaches New Testament and African American perspectives on the Bible at Perkins School of Theology, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. Dr. Smith, welcome.
Thank you. More than 52 years ago, on March 31st, 1968, a few days before a sole gunman and a single bullet from a high-powered rifle would take the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Georgia seer delivered his Remaining Awake Through a Revolution sermon at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. In the sermon, King deployed a political allegory from George Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle to stir the U.S. from its slumbering contentedness, its benumbed and desensitized response to the human rights revolutions that were taking place within it and all around it. In the Georgia seer's own words, I quote, "One of the great liabilities of life is that all too many people find themselves living amidst a period of great social change, and they fail to develop new attitudes and new mental responses that the new situation demands. They are asleep without the capacity to respond appropriately to what is happening around them." And now, more than 52 years later, and for about 6 years running, the idea of staying awake is in vogue again. The call to stay awake this time, though, is not a call to stay awake through revolutions, but perhaps for one, and one that leads to ethical leadership. It is a call to generate the ethical consciousness and literacy that is deemed necessary to challenge what King in the late 1960s would have called complacency, quote, cunning obstruction, and a credibility gap, or the crisis of some aggrieved groups' lack of confidence to believe that their lives matter. For those who face setbacks because of gender disparity or patriarchy, from where will the ethical leadership emerge? For those who are excluded because of medical models of disability, from where will the ethical leadership emerge? Those who are caught up in the throes of a carceral system that has produced an unprecedented mass of incarcerated bodies, a carceral system long in the making and yet short on its rehabilitative delivery. From where will the ethical leadership emerge? To be sure, many young persons are providing some of that leadership. To urge all of us to stay awake, the hashtag Stay Woke, one of the more recognizable hashtags of the Black Lives Matter global network and the larger movement for Black lives, was developed. It appears frequently in social media, from Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram accounts onto Facebook. Furthermore, the hashtag Stay Woke appears in the title of the author-activist Jesse Williams' documentary on the Black Lives Matter movement. The meaning of the expression is straightforward. Elaine Richardson and Alice Ragland defined the term woke, or awake for academic purists, as a, quote, political consciousness type of being awake, end quote. Thus, stay woke means to remain vigilantly conscious and to have the capacity to recognize the complexity of oppression and to know why it is so insidiously difficult to contend against. It means to keep our eyes open in the fight for full equity and in the recognition of the embeddedness of unequal relations of power, especially in an age when one considers the realities of James Baldwin's, I quote, bloody catalog of oppression. Made newly visible in the asphyxiation death of George Floyd by a police officer who placed a knee on Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes, and the killing of Breonna Taylor by 3 Louisville Metro Police Department officers who fired 20 rounds of shots into her apartment after arriving with a no-knock search warrant in Louisville, Kentucky. And so to SBL Council Presider Hugh Page Jr., SBL Council Moderator Sidney Crawford, our distinguished panel from yesterday, our distinguished panel tonight, and to all who now watch or will watch this taped event. If one of the questions that this panel should answer is what advice would you give to the next generation of Black scholars, a question I'm eager to answer because I've now taught biblical studies for some 34 years, my short answer would be stay woke. Stay woke for a revolution, stay woke for ethical leadership in the classroom, on college, university, seminary campuses, and for communities that have been rendered as disposable and insignificant. Let me, in the time remaining, try to speak on those 3 aforementioned venues. First, stay awake in the classroom. The classroom may be virtual, it may be face-to-face, but notice the operations of power at work in cartographies and in canons. Notice the way in which cartographies often de-Africanize African territories. And with respect to the scriptural canons, do remember what Musa Dube has taught us about paying attention to our own canons and not just the canons of colonizers. Also, we need to change our methodological approaches or canons. Why not join Stephen Breck Reed, for example, who deploys Cornel West's typological grid of responses to hegemony to assess both Daniel and the political theory of W.E.B. Du Bois? Why not join Judy Fentress Williams, who takes hip-hop poetics, the distinction between a sample and a remix, to explain the uses of the Exodus tradition in the Hebrew Bible and beyond? Why not join Gay L. Byron, who combines feminist gender criticism, ethno-criticism, and rhetorical criticism to assess early Christianity's ethno-political othering? When we contest cartographies and canons in our classrooms, we create spaces that decolonize minds, radicalize hearts, and equip ministerial and other professionals with the coinage and theoretical sophistication they need to appraise those texts and traditions that often otherwise terrorize and demonize human subjectivities. Stay awake on college, university, or seminary campuses. Before my now 34-year professional journey began, I was blessed to have had the best of teachers who tried to prepare me not only for the classroom, but also for the power dynamics that operate in institutions. You will not find a better set of teachers than Dorsey Blake and Leon Weinberger, who taught me at the University of Alabama, Randall Bailey, Stephen Breck Reed, and David Rensberger, who taught me at ITC, and Marianne Tolbert, Fernando Segovia, and Danielle Pott, who taught me at Vanderbilt University. While all of them brokered for me to be hired and promoted, to receive prestigious national grants and academic pre- and postdoctoral fellowships, some were fully privileged and educated me about legal contracts and institutions and with publishing houses. Some were inside outsiders, keenly aware of the matrix of domination that worked against their own subjectivities. Yet they taught me the value of decentering privilege by learning to listen and to reflect on the marginalization of others before responding. And some honestly told me there would be days, euphemistically speaking, when I would see some occupational hazards. All were trying to awaken me to the nature of institutions, and they were right. Sometimes your spoken words will be minstrelized. With printed publications that almost sound like dialect, despite your ability to furnish a recorded or a manuscript copy of what you've said. They were right. Sometimes your stances on an educational policy will be mischaracterized as if you were advocating a ludicrous argument that could facilely be dismissed, but you were not. My mentors were right. Sometimes your suffering, your brand of suffering, your style of suffering will be minimalized through micro-invalidation, as if your point doesn't matter, and as if you are invisible. And in staying awake, you will need to develop the literacy for demystifying white privilege. You will need to show how class, not in a vulgar, universalizing Marxist manner a la economic determinism, intersects with race, as happened with both some of the New Deal and Fair Deal social legislation policies that ostensibly were directed toward all the poor or the working class, but were tailored structurally to offer affirmative action to whites because of the power of Southern Democrats. And when you are afforded some measures of power granted to you earnestly and not as a result of kowtowing or being the racialized voice of reason that repeatedly absolves white people from having to speak at all in the climate of racial unrest. When you are given such power, you must not become the thing that you hate. If you are invited to a campus group that advocates equity for women and you are a male, you do not set the agenda. You listen, you learn, and you take up whatever role the women assign within your power. Staying awake for communities deemed disposable. Surely for this and the next generation of Black scholars, and let me cast the net more widely to all the members of the SBL, what we do as teachers is not solely a profession, but also a platform. Call attention to the plights of those who are underserved by physical, structural, and ideological forms of violence in our larger societies. Surely we did not learn all of these languages, including sophisticated theories that feel like languages themselves, simply to teach in classrooms and work through the arcane and insidious labyrinths of status quo justifying institutional politics, just to tally up a list of books that could establish us with distinguished chairs, and then that's all there is to our life's work. Surely we will not end our professions having been informed by no grassroots communities and thus perpetuating domination through an arrogant politics of exclusion or more insidious apologies that justify exclusion without, as Bell Hooks would say, quote, without securing spaces for inclusion, end quote. You must decide which grassroots communities will inform your work. But for the rest of my vocation and even beyond, at the least, I want to call attention to the plights of those deemed disposable. And to stay awake, our scholarship must not be isolated from those who experience quotidian assaults all the time as they live. In the age of our COVID-19 pandemic, with its toll of 749,000 deaths and 20.6 million confirmed cases worldwide, one could place a spotlight on the risk to the homeless, the risk to immigrants in detention centers, or the risk to Latinx and Black people who are disproportionately affected because of pre-existing morbidities, poor access to health care, and the density of their residential or workplace spaces. If I may offer but one example to illustrate a community of concern for me, it will be a community that has been caught up in the throes of mass incarceration. As I've stated in a recent yet not yet published work for Brill Press, an underdeveloped theoretical political project in biblical studies is that of a focus on mass incarceration. According to Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, and I quote, "Today, the US has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. The prison population has increased from 300,000 people in the early 1970s to 2.3 million people today. Actually, we could say it's about 2.2 million today based on some recent evidence from the Sentencing Project report. There are nearly 6 million people on probation or on parole. 1 in every 15 people born in the United States in 2001 is expected to go to jail or prison. 1 in every 3 Black male babies born in this century is expected to be incarcerated," end quote. Furthermore, as Kelly Lytle Hernandez, Khalil Gibran Muhammad, and Heather Ann Thompson have noted, I quote, "Immigrant detention, that is the process of forcibly confining immigrants during deportation proceedings, is now the largest system of human caging operated by the US government," end quote. The statistics cited are astounding and alarming. They bespeak fundamental structural problems with the US justice system, its disproportionate percentage of prisoners compared to its population, its propensity to incapacitate its young rather than to educate them, its racial disparities in policing, prosecuting, and sentencing, its voter disenfranchisement and legalized discrimination, and its toes of social stigmatization, collateral disruption of families, and tax dollar prodigality. There's certainly a wedge provided in the Christian Bible to give incarceration the time and study it deserves. Detaining centers or dungeons are repeatedly mentioned throughout the biblical text. Remarkably, though, despite this textual gift of a wedge, biblical scholars on the whole have not pressed imprisonment narrative of the Hebrew Bible or of early Christianity, within the canon or otherwise, to challenge the prison industrial complex of our times. And this failure is odd because, at least in the US has less than 5% of the world population, but 20% of the prison population. Indeed, we have the highest incarceration rate in the world, with 1 in every 100 adults behind bars. Thus, for the next generation of SBL's Black scholars, or indeed for all of its scholars, the issue of mass incarceration, and more broadly, the entire criminal justice system, is a growing edge that deserves our attention. So my brothers and my sisters, for all generations of Black scholars, the next generation, the present one, and for others beyond, please stay woke. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. And once again, my thanks, and thanks on behalf of the Society and of all those that are in attendance this evening, to Dr. Charles, Dr. Crowder, Dr. Lovelace, Dr. Russaw, Dr. Davidson, and Dr. Smith for a set of rich and textured presentations this evening that have given us much about which to think. We are indebted and deeply grateful for the time that you've spent preparing and being with us this evening. With that, I am going to open the floor for you all to continue the conversation amongst yourselves. And I think the best direction is for someone simply to start.
So I think that Dr. Smith, we were able to match our shirts primarily because we were thinking in some of the same directions. And so I'm glad for the programmatic ways in which you have done some of the things I did not do. But I'm particularly intrigued by the triad that you create of classroom, institution, community, or particularly disposable community, where you want to situate the biblical scholar. Is there a sense in which you think that those become the crucial venues more than others, or there are ways in which they actually feed each other to kind of develop the kind of scholarly life that you're envisaging?
Yeah, if I've understood you correctly, I would say that following bell hooks, all scholars need to be informed by grassroots communities. And I mean grassroots communities that are dealing with the quotidian struggles, everyday struggles of people who, in Mark Lamont Hill's words, are deemed as disposable. And so my approach is to connect myself with or to be informed by those grassroots communities that are seeking to address those kinds of problems. So I don't want to write another thing that does not in some way address one of those communities. I've paid my dues. I've studied languages that I've forgotten. I have learned a lot of theory, and I continue to learn theory, and I think that's important, but many I've forgotten. I've learned a lot about history of ancient times, which is important, but I don't want to become a museum curator. What I want to do is to find a way to use the skills that this profession has taught me in the remaining days of my vocation and life to address problems on the ground. I'm not sure, Steve, if I'm actually getting at your question, but that's where my hope lies.
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, but you're raising, and I heard this in Dr. Russell's presentation about formation issues. I mean, she was at getting at formation. So how do we start that? I mean, at the level of formation to create that type of a scholarly life, Dr. Russell. I don't know.
So I think it would have to have a lot to do with the words, the encouragements, the advice that specialized mentor gives, such that while the student is in the pipeline, if you will, they're being nurtured in particular sorts of ways to prepare them for the scholarly life that you speak about.
Steve, could I add one more thing in response to your question? Many of you probably know better than I know Akala, who's a scholar and a rapper from the Caribbean, but I think he grew up in Britain. And when he was giving advice to some persons who were students and who were asking him how best to educate oneself, he said, take 2 sets of notes. 2 sets of notes. So they're the notes that you have to take in order to get through the rituals of certification. And those things you have to do, you'll have to do them in order to get that certification. But you have to read widely. I think Ronald brought this point up, as did you, Steve. You'll have to read widely, broadly. You'll have to know a lot about the various spheres and discourses of knowledge that can clarify and demystify what is presented to us as natural, but is not. And so that second set of notes, I think, is what is demanded. And Kimberly, I think you're right. someone who is shepherding and mentoring our students will have to know to tell students that their time spent in graduate school cannot just be for what is on the written curriculum.
If I could add, I think it's also, what I sometimes term as having, a portable professional portfolio, and having transferable skills. So I think it's, we're good at, at researching and deconstructing and constructing and deconstructing. And so how do we take those skills and put them in another context? How do we take, our desire to find that nuanced answer and place that in another setting? So I think it is, how do we take, all this money that we've paid for these very fine doctoral degrees and use them outside of the hallowed halls of the academy? Because in many ways, when we walk into those halls, we are bringing context with us, right? And in many ways, those same contexts, are the hand in the back and that, what's pushing us and encouraging us, and that sort of invisible arm that's embracing us. And so, yeah, how do we continue to amplify post the PhD those same contexts and use those skills, yes, to say, you know what, I have a nephew, that's incarcerated. What do I do with all of this conversation about the Hebrew Bible and early Christianity? Yeah, in light of the fact that I have a nephew that's incarcerated, or, a sibling, that's, now unemployed due to this pandemic. So for me, it's these transferable skills and this portable professional portfolio. So yeah.
It's part of what you're talking about, the pivot to the public intellectual.
I think it could be, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think to your both Kim and Stephanie, that the part about where we are with the number of schools that are literally purging, especially the humanities departments, the religion departments, right now as part of their budget in shortfalls, that what are the options? I have this PhD now, and what do I do with it? That we do encourage that independent scholar. We do encourage that that public intellectual. But one of the challenges that we also are aware of, that if you are not connected with an institution, that you often can't participate in some of those nurturing spaces that allow you to collaborate with others, to grow in your teaching, your pedagogy, your research. And so how do we also help to give them the faculty, not faculty development, scholarly development, when they are outside of the academy?
Dr. Charles, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sure. Well, one or two things that I'd like to add here. One, I'd like other scholars who are not minority scholars to understand the burden here, right? First, you have to know the materials given to you from a particular Eurocentric point of view. You have to master it. You have to show that you are excellent in that. But for your own survival, you also need to know about other areas. It's not that you have a choice, really. I felt that if I have to become an intellectual, if I have to have a critical voice, I cannot just repeat the same old and same old. I need to read widely. So sometimes you feel that you are shrinking because it's not possible to really master so many things, Greek, Hebrew, Coptic, German, of French and also to read race theory, and so on and so forth. So, but that's what we have to do in a way to survive. But the other thing that I'd like to say, I remember a senior scholar, a white senior scholar, said, it's good to do social activism, but you know this is not scholarship. Okay, so when you are young, as a young scholar, you're trying to grow, you hear these remarks, and you get a job, you are going to be evaluated not on what you do to help your people, to help your community, but on how you produce, how many articles you put out, how many books you put out. And sometimes, you know, you have minoritized students coming to see you in your office because they feel that they can confide in you as many times the only one. And so you are bombarded. So how do you reconcile all of this in your own life? To me, it's almost seems to be impossible to live that kind of life. But in another way, it is also exhilarating because I would not want to be the kind of model the Eurocentric system wants me to be. I want to be who I am. I want to show you that I can play Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart, but I can play jazz also.
So with that, this is probably a good point at which to make the transition to our Q&A session. And so I'm going to yield the virtual floor to my colleague and fellow council member, Dr. Sydney White Crawford, to facilitate this next section of our symposium. Dr. Crawford.
Thank you, Hugh, and thank you everyone for a very stimulating program. As you can imagine, we've gotten lots of questions. I'm going to start with an extremely practical one. A whole group of questions came in about the FTE. How does one get involved? How does one apply to be a mentee? How does it work?
That feels like my question.
Yes, I think so.
So I can speak most directly to the easiest part of that question. How does one apply for some of the fellowships? Simply visit their website. You can Google the Forum for Theological Exploration and click on the site. And there you can learn of the many different opportunities for and resources that FTE offers.
Okay, wonderful. I think that
FTEleaders.org. More specifically, FTEleaders.org.
You go by heart. FTEleaders.org.
Okay, that answers a lot of questions. I think that there are people out there who you'll be hearing from.
That link is also now in the chat window, visible to attendees.
Okay. The next question, they're kind of related, and I think they are they're kind of aimed at everybody's presentation on the panel. Is it our responsibility to continue challenging those in white spaces at the table for equal space, or should we begin a movement to secure our own table? And a corollary question, how do we dismantle hegemonic systems when we depend on them for our own advancement?
Let me take the second, and I think hegemonic systems will work to the extent that you acknowledge that they are the thing that's giving you life. And so if you submit to its principles and you submit to its logic, you submit to the fact that it is the only place for you, then of course you're trapped. And you're bought, you're sold. in that system. So I think part of the thing is for a Black scholar to embrace a sense of freedom. And I'm saying this not necessarily because it is simple or it is easy, because there are systems that are just set up not to make, that don't presume that we are free individuals. So part of it is in many ways liberating yourself from the entrapment that this is my only option. Yeah, let me leave it there.
Anyone else want to respond to that?
I don't think, if I may add something, I don't think it's about trying to get at the center from the margins. I just think that it is about doing what you think is the kind of work needed to be done. Whereas it is in your own discipline to nudge them into considering other questions or looking at the text from different angles, or just showing them that there are different ways to do biblical scholarship. It's not about dismantling the whole cathedral. It is about upsetting it. It is about probing it and upsetting some conclusions of this. But as Sid was saying, there is, I think, in me and others, this sense of we are not slaves. We are not slaves. We want to do our kind of work. If you want to read it, it's fine. If you don't want to read it, that's okay too.
One of the things that I think comes up in the questions is that if within our system, once you have tenure, you do have more freedom. But what about people who are adjuncts or on term limited employment or are just trying to reach tenure? How do they negotiate what can be a hegemonic, colonial, racist system?
Just quickly, I was an adjunct for 5 years. But I said, you know what, life is short. So I need to be who I am and do what I think is right. And regardless of what happens, and so far I think I'm doing well. So I say to younger scholars, be true to yourself, know yourself, be true to your community.
Anyone else want to respond?
I would add, you know, I think Chronicle of Higher Ed had a couple of articles around, you know, it was sort of a challenge for those of us who have tenure. How do we sort of leverage, you know, that sort of tenure power, if you will, and I think in my own words, not just to become allies, but perhaps accomplices with our contingent faculty colleagues. Because I think, I mean, many of us, you know that a lot of our institutions resourced by adjunct, and you know, who knows what that is going to look like during this pandemic, during this fall semester. So, you know, what are the ways in which, you know, for those of us who are at institutions where there's some degree of agency around tenure, how do we use that? And I think as Dr. Russell said, as it relates to, you know, we shouldn't expect mentees to reach out to mentors. How can we reach out and check in with our contingent faculty colleagues to see what are the ways in which we can journey with them?
Thanks. Thank you, Stephanie. Anyone else? I think another question that came up, and this is again related. How can or do you provide hope for the prospective scholars of color And how do you link this hope to current political, social, and economic conditions? And this is where the problem of the current economic situation, the problem of adjunct faculty, all of these things were brought up in this context.
My sense is that someone getting started in the scholarly life, I think, has to embrace the possibility of the description, I think, that Abraham was giving us, Stephanie was providing for us as well. That is to say, a commitment to teaching in its broadest sense. Because if the vision tends to be, I want to teach at an institution that looks like this. I mean, and this is the challenge that we face when we go through graduate school. We want to end up teaching at a school like we've been educated at. And then, of course, the disappointment comes that we would never get a job in a school like that, or those schools are going to no longer exist. So it's facing those realities. And this is not to say don't do a PhD or the scholarly life doesn't happen. It's finding out alternative venues for the work that will sustain you. And I remember, of course, being deeply impressed meeting someone who had a PhD in American Studies, who was the education officer for a trade union. And I had to ask seriously, what are you doing? What's the kind of a work? And I was impressed with the kind of work. I would not have thought that that was a venue for someone with the kinds of scholarly interests. So that they from our vantage point, there is not a lot of hope. Certainly, I will speak for myself. We could give in terms of what the economic and political realities look like. If you think they will get better, well, okay, fine. But I mean, even if they get better, I don't know that they will be better for our type of work or situations or the kinds of things that we are interested in. That is something that we definitely will have to make and create on our own and find the spaces for that to happen. And the venues are there because, you know.
Anyone else? I think that was very helpful. I'm gonna, if no one else has anything to add, I'm gonna pivot to teaching. Because several questions came up about teaching. And this is for all your colleagues, both minority and European American colleagues. In light of Black Lives Matter, Say Her Name, Me Too, and now COVID-19, what would you suggest that we do with our teaching? Are there resources that we can tap into? What about, should we make changes in terms of content or methods to respond to our students at this really pivotal time in our collective lives?
Well, I'll start. While I am not a fan of offering book lists, hashtag book lists, what I will suggest, my first question would be, to what end? What are you trying to accomplish in your COVID-19 teaching experience, your Say Her Name teaching experience, your Black Lives Matter teaching experience? And then I would, based upon that, I think I would probably start, I would start away from the syllabus. Maybe the focus needs to be on what is the experience that the students will walk away from your class with. And then you use your syllabus and your resources to undergird the experience, the transformation that you're trying to, that you have as an unwritten student learning goal.
Anyone?
Could I respond? I think the attachment that one has to grassroots communities could inform you on how you should reshape your syllabi or try it throughout your institution to change the curriculum. So rather than simply try to work by yourself in estimating what needs to be done with the syllabus or what needs to be done institutionally with the curriculum, why not allow various grassroots communities to inform you on what is needed now for tackling mass incarceration? What is needed now for helping this society and societies throughout the world to understand what is really meant by the expression Black Lives Matter, around which, of course, there's so much confusion because people have not addressed issues of white privilege. So that's my approach to it. How can grassroots communities inform you on what is best to do, what is best to say in order to achieve certain goals that shape your curriculum or shape your syllabi?
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Anyone else? Well,
I would add,
oh, go ahead.
Certainly Wabash Center has a number of resources. If you to Dr. Russell's point, the hashtag syllabus or reading list. But to her question about towards what end, also who's your audience, who's in the classroom? Because I think we also need to be mindful of not overburdening those Black bodies in your classroom with the burdens of racism and anti-oppression and all of those things when they right now are living these experiences. And sometimes the classroom is a place of refuge from that, to then bring on these additional, in your teaching, all of this, bombarding them with your agenda of racism or anti-racism, anti-oppression, and back to and towards what end, and having those students, expecting them to respond to their classmates about their experiences of racism and discrimination and maybe even violence by police or other authorities. So again, just be mindful of what is your agenda and what is towards what end.
Thank you, that's very helpful. We have time for one last question, and I'm going to pivot to the SBL, since the SBL is the sponsor of this panel. What imminent hopes, formative formations, or second set of note-taking would you like to see actualized in the SBL?
I guess, Sydney?
Mm-hmm.
Several years ago, when I think I was chair of what is the infamous title QREP, the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Biblical Literature jointly sponsored a series of recruitment events. I think Randall mentioned one was held at Union. I believe another was held on the West Coast. I'm not exactly sure at which school.
ESR.
ESR, thank you very much. And then a third one was held at Vanderbilt. If you were to look at some of the leading lights, so to speak, in biblical scholarship and throughout the AAR today, and I mean younger biblical scholars and AAR scholars, many of them benefited from those recruitment efforts. Stephanie is nodding. I don't know if you were a part of that experience.
I was, Vanderbilt had the second one, and Fernando Segovia, our advisor, was the lead, and I was his conference administrator. So you're so right. I can point to students in Hebrew Bible and the New Testament who are now professors who came through that conference. So yeah, absolutely.
So I would welcome SBL taking the role of initiating with AAR another set of recruitment conferences where the opportunities can be given to persons in undergraduate institutions and at the master's level to receive mentoring and grooming from both AAR and SBL faculty.
Great, thank you. Any other ideas? It really helps to have very practical things out on the table, I know, for SBL leadership.
I think it's worth noting that these were fully funded. So, you know, it was like, you know, whatever it took to get students there, they didn't have to pay anything. So I just want to add that it was fully funded.
Those conferences were before my time. So my question is, did they also include PhD granting institutions? Did they have their students there as well, or a way for them to support the Black students at PhD granting institutions?
Sure. I think Vanderbilt is a case in point. So I don't know all of the schools that were involved. I think Princeton may have been involved, but yes, there were PhD granting institutions that had their students involved.
As one, I remember going through applications and having to copy literally the applications for the committee. We had students from coast to coast, parts of Canada as well. And so absolutely, it was very broad. And I want to add that it was all students of color. So, you know, even Asian students, Latino students as well. And they came with recommendations from professors of their said institutions. So primarily, you know, an MDiv student, and primarily the third year, but some of them were in their second year.
Excellent. Any other specific things you'd like to see the SBL do?
Maybe that the SBL could consider students outside of North America, students from the Caribbean, students from other places. There are so many bright young students around the world who would be so helpful to the academy, really, if they had the opportunity. So the SBL could be in kind of a conversation with people around the world, that, you know, that the SBL could sponsor one student a year, something like this, from the Caribbean or from other places. I think it would be very, very helpful. Look at me, I'm here speaking because I had two missionaries from the US. They came to Haiti and they saw something in me. And they said, would you like to go to Canada and study? I said, sure, yeah. So here I am. So I think that the SBL could do more, and because we actually need these voices.
I just received a prompt from one of the panelists from yesterday saying that, you know, fine, the recruitment conferences and getting students into doctoral programs, but how do we also work with, yes, these PhD granting institutions to ensure that these are safe spaces, and that the as students are matriculating through these doctoral programs, that they're dealing with the toxicity that they will encounter. So how do we decolonize, if you will, these institutions so that our students can matriculate safely and in wholeness?
You know what, Stephanie? I'm gonna push for a radical modification. Maybe there ought to be 2 tracks for this conference. One for the students and one for the faculty.
That speaks to a question that came up. How do we make sure that white instructors are, to use Abraham's word, woke, and thus can be part of the safe space for students of color? Yep. So there's a lot of educational process that needs to go on all sides of the question. I think we're signaling that it's after 9 o'clock, and so Hugh, do you want to close the floor?
So thanks very much, Sydney, for facilitating such a productive Q&A. This could go on all night. And I want to say thank you to our panelists, to everyone who was responsible for organizing this 2-day symposium. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has shared their perspectives over the past 2 days. When I started my own journey as a graduate student, and I'm afraid to say it was 36 years ago, never in my wildest imagination would I have conceived of an event over 2 days that centered the lived experiences and the realities of Black scholars. And to be a part of an event of this kind, and I've used this word frequently this evening, is an honor. It's an honor to be here with all of you. It's an honor to be here with all of those who have been attendees at this 2-day symposium. And so please know how grateful the society is, the council is, and all of the organizers are for the role that you've played in helping to write the next chapter of the society's life. Please, everyone, remember that the video of tonight's session will be posted to the SBL website in the coming days. And so my final responsibility as moderator this evening is to express my gratitude once again to you, our panelists, and to those who were a part of our conversation yesterday, and to bid you all a good night.
Thank you.